across the world, patriarchy is still a problem. In India, it's much more amplified, and there are many barriers that prevent women from stepping outside the home and into the workplace. These include safety concerns, family pressures, burden of housework, intergenerational care, because most of India still lives in joint family setups. And there's a chronic underinvestment in childcare. All of these problems are magnified 1,000-fold in rural India because you also don't have access to reliable water, electricity, and sanitation, which means a lot of the time of these women go in procuring these resources that they need to run their homes, leaving them very little time to actually be able to get from point A to point B to work. This is also still a country where conversations about the economy, around the economy, how it will grow, in which direction, is still largely dictated by men. And the focus is on the market, and the market is outside the home. If the women aren't allowed to leave home, how can they participate in that market? Just to give you a simple example, when we were speaking to Commitment to Kashmir, which is one of the enterprises that we featured in Business of Handmade, the enterprise works in Kashmir, which is ripe with political strife. And it's very difficult for native Kashmiris to trust outsiders because there's just such an aura of mistrust and the kind of police state that is there in Kashmir, right? Which means that even though the women in Kashmir are actually married off much later than other parts of rural India, even though the women have access to more education than most women in mainland India, they're still not allowed to leave their homes to go and participate in the workforce because there's such a stigma around what if something happens to the women? You know, what if there's a riot and the women get caught in the riots, which means that despite all of their education, despite all of their entrepreneurial ability, they're still restricted to work that they can take from home, which is where we think craft enterprises have such a significant role to play because it allows the women access to work, but on their terms and working within the limitations that India in its current stage places on a lot of women wanting to participate in the labor force. Some of these enterprises, mostly because most of them either are led by women or have a strong women team, we believe have a huge impact in terms of the kinds of policies that they've put in place within their enterprises, which extend beyond just providing employment to the women. They also look at workshops which talk to them about maternal health, sexual health, wellness. How can they empower the women to have agency in terms of the decisions that they're taking with regards to how many children they can have, right? All of this is intrinsically linked to financial independence and economic empowerment. Just to give you an example, one of the organizations that we're speaking with called Saheli Women, which works in rural Rajasthan, the founder was telling us about how, because of these kinds of workshops that they conduct with these women, the women are now saying no to multiple pregnancies, that they are actually pushing back against their families, which if you are in India, you'll realize how incredibly difficult it is because it's not just your husband, it's also your mother-in-law who has a say in how many children you need to have. And you need to keep having children till you have a boy because the boy is like the pride of the family, you know? So it's a sensitive issue. And because of the work of these kinds of enterprises, the women are now pushing back to say, no, we won't have children at 16. You know, we want to wait until we're older. This is the kind of access that we want. We want to wait until 2 years between children. No, we don't want more children at all, which is really a sign of impact, which is difficult to capture because I think traditionally when people look at impact metrics, they're looking at it in terms of quantitative data, which is fine. But I think in developing countries like India, it's also really important to look at anecdotal evidence in terms of the social and developmental progress that's happening when it comes to enterprises working with women in rural India, right? To give you another example, one of the enterprises that we featured in our Business of Handmade industry, the women that they work with are now saving because of workshops on financial literacy that the enterprise has held for them. So women are able to plan, even if it's just to buy a television, you know, or to buy a scooty, which will take them from their home to their workplace, allowing them the kind of freedom and independence which they otherwise would not have had, right? Which also depends largely on where you are in India, because in South India, women are more educated, have more freedom. If you are in North India, it's still unthinkable that you would be going from point A to point B without a male escort. And that's in 2022. There are some villages that you can go to in Uttar Pradesh where it would be difficult for you to even see a woman out alone by herself, leave alone, speak to her without the presence of a man. This is slowly changing, but that change is being brought about by some of the enterprises that we've featured, because not only are they speaking to the women, they're also speaking to the men. Because the progress is not going to be possible without including the men in the process of bringing about this change, because it's all very well and good when we're sitting comfortably in our homes and metros to talk about feminism and how change needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly. Very difficult in a country that's as diverse and populous as India, to bring about that change as quickly as you would like it. So these enterprises, we believe, are doing a really good job in shaking some of these things up. Some of the challenges still persist, though, and those are, like Priya mentioned, just policy changes, laws that are being brought into effect without taking into consultation 50% of the population that law is going to impact. Rangsutra, another one of the enterprises that we featured, talks about how it's a unique model where the artisans are also shareholders in the company itself, which means that they have a seat at the board to make decisions that will impact them. India then changed the rule to say that if you're a shareholder, you need to necessarily have a demat account, which is essentially an account where you can hold electronic forms of financial securities. To access a demat account, you need to have a PAN card and an Aadhaar card. And those are only given to you if you are earning above a certain limit. Most women in India who live in rural India are not making the kind of incomes that would justify them getting a PAN card, right? Which means that even though the enterprise wants the artisans to be shareholders, the law is preventing them from getting that right. And this confers upon women the kind of confidence that they have in saying they have a piece of paper that belongs to them, that's in their name, that is not in the name of their father, husband, son, or father-in-law, which is a huge deal for women in terms of instilling in them the sense of pride that whatever they have is through their own merit. So these are just some of the examples of the kinds of benefit and the kinds of social progress that can be brought about if we were to invest in enterprises that are working with women artisans, because it's not just about providing them employment, it's also about providing them access to information, education, resources, and networks that will help them that will enable them to live a more well-rounded life, which takes into account equitable development across health and economic indices.